I want to talk to you about the politics of this. Did she not think she was going to get that question?
It's important to remember that this is a negotiation.
It's a good photo of.
I have an opportunity to create chaos.
There is always an email. We are so insignificant in this cosmos. Do you want some facts on baguettes? I'm just feeding you the stories. Maybe this is The Context.
News in depth. The Context with Christian Fraser on BBC World News.
Hello, I'm Christian Fraser. You're watching The Context on BBC News. A show of military might in Moscow. President Putin defending his actions in Ukraine. At Russia's Victory Day celebrations, President Putin claimed it is the West that are making threats and preparing to invade Russia. Fierce battles are continuing in Donbass in eastern Ukraine, where Russia is pounding areas with artillery. The port city of Odessa has been hit with missiles and is now under curfew. Here at home, the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says he'll resign if he's fined for breaking COVID rules. The police are investigating an event in Durham he attended with party workers.
If the police decide to issue me with a fixed penalty notice, I would, of course, do the right thing and step down.
Tonight, with The Context, the former policy advisor to the National Security Council, Hagar Shamali, and the former British intelligence officer, Christopher Steele. Hello, a warm welcome to the programme. There was no claim of victory, no assurance the fight in Ukraine would end soon. Instead, President Putin used this year's Victory Day parade to tell the broader Russian public they could carry on as normal. The generals would handle this special operation, he said, ridding Ukraine of the torturers, death squads and Nazis. There was no evidence for those claims, and it's important to note that the losses the Russians suffered between 1941 and 1945 were not theirs alone. Across the entire Soviet Union, more than 26 million people were killed, soldiers and civilians. And while Russia suffered the highest number of losses, almost 14 million, Ukraine and Belarus also took huge casualties. In fact, per capita of population, Ukraine lost more, some 16% of its population. Belarus more than a quarter. So today was not just a day to be marked by Russia, it was also a day of remembrance in Kyiv, and President Zelensky had a message for Vladimir Putin. Let's go then to Kyiv and speak to our correspondent Clive Myra, who's there for us tonight. It must be sickening, Clive, after everything that's happened in Ukraine over the last 3 months, to hear President Putin try to link these two wars. How did they mark Victory Day in Ukraine? Yeah, we're going to get into some of that later in the programme. Clive, really good to see you. Thank you for being with us tonight. Let's pick up just on what we saw today in Moscow. Christopher, if I could start with you. I was looking out for one character in particular, and that was the Chief of Staff, Valery Gerasimov, who, according to unconfirmed reports, was injured on the front lines last week in the Donbass area. What should we read into the fact that he wasn't there? Well, as we were discussing with Clive, there has been fighting around Kharkiv since the first hours of this invasion. But lately, Ukrainian fighters not only regained control of the city, but as Clive suggests, they've been advancing on the Russian troops. The Ukrainian fighters are represented there by the purple arrows. The red arrows are the Russians pushing towards Izium and the fight in the south. But now they have a problem defending that supply route from that key logistics hub of Belgorod across the border. And over the weekend, the Russians destroyed 3 bridges to try and blunt the Ukrainian advance. That would also suggest that they are, at least for now, throwing in the towel in the fight for Kharkiv. And whatever way you look at that, the Russian army is stretched, because when they started this war, they had 130 battalions on the border with Ukraine. There's around 700 people in each battalion. Only 90 of those battalion groups are still functional, and the front line they're covering is huge. From Kherson all the way around to Kharkiv, they're covering about 800 kilometres, and in parts, they are up against Ukraine's best trained fighters. So let's pick that up then with the retired 4-star General David Petraeus, former CIA chief and former commander of the US and NATO forces in Afghanistan. General, it's good to see you again. Can we talk about the decision not to mobilise forces? I would think that option is still on the table because it's being publicly debated on the state television channels. Would it change things on the battlefield? General Petraeus, stay with us if you will, because we're about to be joined by the US acting ambassador in Kyiv. Diplomats, of course, from the United States back in Kyiv for the first time since the war began. Small group returned yesterday, led by the Charge d'Affaires, Christian Fraser. The plan is to get the US embassy back up and running, at least in some format. So let's bring in then the acting ambassador. It's lovely to have you on the programme. What's it like being back in Kyiv? How functional are you at the moment with the numbers that you have there? Well, it's very good of you to join us from Kyiv. It's nice to catch up on what you're doing there with the diplomatic staff that's returned. Thank you very much for being with us. Christopher Steele, can I just come to you with regards to all these diplomats that are returning to Kyiv? In the midst of a war zone, how difficult is that to manage? Because one would anticipate as well that the Russians are there as well. That's the insight and expertise we get on this programme. Hagar, thank you very much for that. David Petraeus, General David Petraeus, it's lovely to have your company on the programme. Thank you for joining us once again. Do stay with us. We're going to head to a quick break, but we're going to talk plenty more about the Victory Day parade in Russia. We're going to hear from the Russian side. We're also going to speak to a photographer, a British photographer, who spent a lot of time in Ukraine over the last 4 years documenting life in Donbass, because don't forget, there has been a war there since 2014. We'll speak to him very shortly. Do stay with us. Hello, I'm Christian Fraser. You're watching The Context on BBC News. Victory Day in Moscow. Russia uses its annual parade to justify the war in Ukraine. Fierce battles are continuing in Donbass in eastern Ukraine, where Russia is pounding areas with artillery. The city of Odessa in the south has been hit with missiles and is now under curfew. Life before the invasion. We'll speak to the war photographer who's been capturing the pictures of normal life in Ukraine for several years. Here at home, the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says he'll resign if he's fined for breaking COVID rules. Police are investigating an event in Durham he attended with party workers. And after the debate was over in Strasbourg today, the hemicycle at the EU was given over to interpretive dance. Tonight, with The Context, former policy advisor to the National Security Council, Hagar Shamali, and Christopher Steele, the former British intelligence officer. Well, here in the UK, the opposition Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says he will resign if he receives a fine from Durham police for breaking COVID lockdown rules. Sir Keir is under pressure after police reopened their investigation into an event in Durham at which he was photographed drinking beer and eating a curry at an MP's office. A memo that appeared this weekend suggested the meal was a pre-planned event. Boris Johnson and the Chancellor were both fined for attending an impromptu birthday party during the lockdown in the Cabinet office. Both have refused to resign. There are other parties in Number 10 that are still under investigation. Well, let's speak to our political correspondent, Nick Eardley. Nick, this does put quite a lot of focus on the Chief Constable of Durham Police, Jo Farrell. She now knows what she's deciding on here. Nick, thank you very much indeed for that. So there you go, Hagar. It's a thing, integrity, that we don't have much of in politics at the moment, in your country or in mine. Or that is the way it's perceived by the public, at least. Yeah, indeed so. Well, let's head to back to the victory parade that we were talking about a little earlier. During the parade today in Moscow, Russian state television channels were hacked to display messages telling viewers that their hands were covered in blood. With millions tuning in to watch the parade in Moscow, the no to war messages are understood to have featured on a majority of Russian TV channels between 7 a.m. and 11 a.m, disrupting coverage of the Kremlin's celebrations. So far, the Kremlin, of course, has managed to keep the facts of the war away from the public, with state television distorting much of what they see. So how will the Russian public then react to the speech that they heard? Let's bring in Uriel Epstein, who is Ukrainian-Russian. He studies a lot of these things and the reactions in Moscow. So let me pick that up with you. How do you think the speech will have gone down in Moscow today? Christopher, can I pick this up with you? Because I know that in your private work now, you represent some clients who operate in Russia. Do you find those Western companies that have stood up against the war, perhaps Russian interests that have stood up against the war, is there now a shakedown by the state? Are they basically moving in and stealing or forcing people into fire sales if they oppose Putin's war? OK, we'll leave that there. Uriel Epstein, thank you very much indeed for being with us. It's very good to see you. Thanks for coming back on. The war in Ukraine conjures up many images, but before those images of war, there was normality, or at least some type of normality for most of Ukraine. But it's important to remember that for a lot of people in the Donbass, this war's been ongoing since 2014. Mark Neville is a war photographer who spent the last few years in Donbass and in other parts of the country documenting what that ordinary life looked like. He's just released a book of photographs days before Russia's invasion. It's called Stop Tanks with Books, and it depicts Ukrainians going about their daily lives. And we can speak to Mark Neville, who's joining us from Kyiv. Good evening. It's a really fascinating book. We've been looking through it today in the office. How long have you been taking pictures in Ukraine, and why did you decide to do this? Yeah, it really is. I know Mark sent free copies to politicians and world leaders. Let's hope it has the desired effect. We are out of time, Mark Neville. I could talk to you more about all your fabulous photographs, but people will be able to find it online. Christopher Steele, thank you very much to you. Hagar Shamali, nice to have you with us tonight. Thank you for your company. We'll be back same time tomorrow. Thanks for watching. Good night.
In our connected world, all news is international.
So, for in-depth analysis,